Okay, so what if I told you there's this wild theory floating around the internet that India has secretly, quietly redrawn its border with China, and not with some dusty old treaty, but with actual troops on the ground? Well, that's the pretty explosive claim we're going to break down today.
I mean, think about that for a second. The claim isn't about some future war or a plan for tomorrow. No, the theory is that India has already gone in and secretly taken back a huge chunk of land from China. The big question, of course, is could that really be true?
So, where does this all come from? Well, this whole argument was put forward in a pretty popular video from a channel called Prem Talks. What we're going to do here is just deconstruct their claims, piece by piece, so you can see exactly what they're saying and how they get there.
All right, let's get right into it. First things first. What is the actual shocking claim at the heart of all this?
The core of this whole theory really comes down to just one number: 1,000 square kilometers. The argument is that the Indian army has already, right now, taken control of that much land inside the super strategic Shaksgam Valley. And this is where it gets really wild. This secrecy. The claim isn't that this is something they're planning to do. The assertion is that it has already happened, that Indian soldiers are literally on the ground there as we speak, and this whole massive move has been kept completely, totally quiet. Now, to really get why a claim like this is so explosive, you've got to understand the history here. It all comes back to this valley's really complicated and disputed past. So, what exactly is the Shaksgam Valley? Well, it's this huge, remote piece of land. We're talking over 5,000 square kilometers. From India's point of view, it's part of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Now, the key moment here was back in 1963. That's when Pakistan basically just gave the whole area to China in a border deal. But here's the kicker. India has never, ever recognized that agreement as legitimate. And the timeline here is super important. It really kicks off in 1959 when China occupies Tibet. And suddenly, boom, there's this brand new direct border with India. Then, just a few years later, in 63, Pakistan gives the valley to China. And that one move is what leads directly to the situation we have today, where India's official position is, nope, that whole valley belongs to us. And the source video really sums up the whole Indian grievance with one simple but really powerful question. Whose land is it to give away? I mean, the point is obvious, right? How can Pakistan legally just hand over a piece of land that, in India's eyes, it never actually owned in the first place? Okay, so all this history, this long-running dispute, it sets the stage for the video's main point, that this very moment, right now, is a golden opportunity for India to make a move. The video really pushes this idea that there's a huge sense of urgency. They present it as this very specific now or never moment, a window of opportunity for India to finally act and take back what it claims as its own. So the big question is, why now? Well, the theory is that China is facing this kind of perfect storm of problems. First, the argument is that Xi Jinping is completely obsessed with a potential invasion of Taiwan by 2026. He needs a big win to shore up support at home. And because of that, China's military is supposedly stretched super thin, too thin to handle another major fight in the tough terrain of the Himalayas. And that right there is the key calculation in this whole theory. The idea is, with China looking one way, staring at Taiwan, it creates this huge blind spot. And right in that blind spot, that's where India's opportunity lies, to finally move on its claims in the Himalayas. And what about the other player in all this, Pakistan? Well, according to this theory, they're basically a non-factor. The video is pretty blunt, calling the country a failed state and arguing it just doesn't have the muscle, militarily or economically, to get involved in any real way. But the theory doesn't just stop there with the local players. Nope. It zooms way out to the global stage and brings in the United States in what the video calls the Great Power Game. And this is where it gets really interesting. The video lays out this kind of three-step theory for U.S. strategy in Asia. Okay, so step one. Back in the Cold War, you support China to balance out the Soviet Union. Right. Step two. Now you support India to balance out China. And then here's the kicker. Step three. You give just enough weapons to Pakistan to keep India from getting too strong. It's all about checks and balances. So what's the ultimate goal here? What's the end game of a strategy like that? Well, according to this theory, the U.S. wins when there's a kind of controlled chaos.
Its interests are served best when all the big players in the region are busy watching each other, competing with each other, making sure that no single one of them can ever get powerful enough to dominate the whole show. All right, so everything we've talked about seems to be pointing in one direction, right? A big, messy conflict. Well, hold on, because this is where the whole theory takes a really unexpected turn. It suddenly pivots and asks, is the future really about confrontation, or could it be about cooperation?
And to set up this final, surprising twist, the video makes a huge claim. It just flat out states that the massive China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, is basically a failed project.
So if the China-Pakistan project is dead in the water, the video throws out this really radical alternative. It says, forget about fighting. What if there was a China-India economic corridor? I know, it sounds totally crazy, but just think about it. It would be an absolute game changer, an alliance that completely redraws the map and leaves Pakistan totally out of the picture.
But come on, why on earth would these two huge rivals ever work together? Well, the video explains the cold, pragmatic logic with this one quote. Power attracts power. When necessary, you must join hands with the enemy. This is diplomacy. It's this vision of pure, unsentimental realpolitik, where cash and influence could actually be stronger than decades of bad blood.
And that's where this whole viral theory leaves us, at this really fascinating crossroads. It paints a picture of two totally different futures for the Himalayas. On one hand, you have secret military operations and conflict. On the other, this grand, almost unthinkable economic partnership. It's a pretty stark choice between war and trade. But maybe the most provocative thought in this whole thing is this. What if that first path, the path of conflict, is actually seen as the necessary first step to get to the second?